Hello and welcome to Culture and Trauma, training for schools on immigrant and migratory Hispanic students and their families. This video is being presented by mental health researchers at the Center for Leadership and Disability in the School of Public Health at Georgia State University. This training was supported by funding from the Morehouse School of Medicine's Community Engagement and Course Action Network and Georgia Project Aware. The purpose of this training is to inform school personnel, teachers, counselors, social workers, administrators about the lived experiences and related traumas that are unique to Latino immigrant and migratory children living in the U.S. This module is important and timely because, according to the 2020 census, the Hispanic population has grown 23% since 2010 and represents almost 19% of the U.S. population. Slightly more than half, 51% of the total U.S. population growth between 2010 and 2020 came from growth in this group of individuals. This training module was developed and informed by input received from 54 U.S.-born immigrant and migratory Hispanic participants in 5 focus groups held in Hall, Fulton, and Gwinnett counties in 2021. Subsequently, you will gain a deeper understanding of the diverse experiences and complex needs of this often underrepresented and underserved population. Participants should walk away with an increased sensitivity to the impact past and current traumas can have on migratory Latino children and become better equipped to empathize with and meet the needs of these children and their families, many of whom have experienced trauma in the past and are still experiencing traumatic stressors presently. By the end of this module, you should be able to explain cultural competence, cultural humility, and cultural sensitivity and their importance when working with, teaching, and providing services to migratory and immigrant children and their families. Describe the migration journey and related exposures to traumatic childhood events. Describe what trauma is and how it can impact an immigrant migratory Latino child. Describe common mental health challenges these youth might face and ways to meet their unique mental health and behavioral needs. In this training, you will be hearing about some issues that may be triggering for you or that may make you feel uncomfortable. So please be sure to practice self-care. It's okay to pause the video, take a few deep breaths, or do whatever helps you in difficult moments, and then restart the video once you are feeling up to doing so. Culture is a term often used to encompass a group of people who share common characteristics such as language, beliefs, customs, and social practices. Understanding what is meant by the terms such as cultural competence and cultural appropriateness and how to put them into practice are important for being able to relate to and empathize with all of your students given their diverse backgrounds and unique lived experiences. We're going to be doing some knowledge checks throughout this training just to see where you are in terms of what you already know. In terms of our first knowledge check, which of the following is the correct term for a person of Latin American descent? Throughout the last half century in the U.S., different pan-ethnic terms have arisen to describe Americans who trace their roots to Latin America and Spain. You have probably heard the terms Hispanic, Latino, Latina, and more recently, Latinx. You may have wondered which term is the most respectful to use. Which of these terms is correct? Unfortunately, there is no easy answer. It really depends on the individual person and the context. In December 2019, Pew Research Center conducted a bilingual survey of over 3,000 U.S. Latino adults. Only 23% who self-identified as Hispanic or Latino have heard the term Latinx, and just 3% say they used it to describe themselves. The majority, 61%, said they prefer Hispanic to describe the Hispanic or Latino population in the U.S. Therefore, for the purposes of this video, the term Hispanic will be used to describe people of Mexican, Puerto Rican, Cuban, Central and South American, Dominican, and Hispanic descent who may be of any race. Cultural competence is about enhancing your knowledge, will, and actions to build understanding between people, to appreciate cultural differences, to be respectful and open to different cultural perspectives, and working towards equality. Understanding that Hispanic children and families you serve could speak another language besides English is an example of cultural competence. Hispanic children could speak Spanish, Portuguese, or another native language in their respective households. Even in a situation where a student or parent does speak English, Spanish might be their preferred language for communicating, the one with which they have the greatest proficiency and comprehension. In practice, a culturally competent school system provides equal access to an array of effective, culturally appropriate services and options. A culturally competent person has positive attitudes towards different cultures and respects varying cultural ways of knowing, seeing, and living. This involves being aware of your own worldviews and learned assumptions that may have made you culturally biased. A culturally competent individual celebrates and values diversity, and they have the ability to understand and honor differences. Cultural competence is an ongoing journey that involves constant, critical self-reflection as well as learning to understand how people perceive the world and participate in different systems of shared knowledge. Cultural appropriateness is the process by which individuals and members of society respond respectfully and effectively to people of all cultures, language, classes, races, ethnic backgrounds, and religions. Cultural appropriateness recognizes, affirms, and values the worth of individuals, families, and communities, and protects and preserves the diversity and dignity of each. Cultural appropriateness is respecting others' individuals' values, beliefs, and traditions. An example of cultural appropriateness is pronouncing a student's name right. Many traditional Hispanic names are actually not pronounced like they're spelled, such as Jimena, which starts with an X, Jesus, which would look like Jesus, and Jorge, which basically looks like George. Therefore, one suggestion would be to first ask the student to pronounce their name instead of just trying to guess. It's imperative that we also discuss the terms cultural humility and cultural sensitivity to become aware of how they can impact the work of school-based administrators, educators, and staff working with newcomer, immigrant, and migrant Hispanic families and students. Cultural humility is a humble and respectful attitude towards individuals of other cultures that pushes a person to, 1, challenge their own cultural biases through self-critiques, 2, realize that they cannot possibly know everything about another culture, and 3, active lifelong participation in learning about other cultures and unique personal experiences. Therefore, we must be humble and flexible, bold enough to look at ourselves critically and desire to learn more. And in this case, there must be a desire to learn more about the newcomer, immigrant, and migrant Hispanic students and families that you serve. In tandem, cultural sensitivity or awareness is the understanding of the needs and emotions of your own culture and that of other culture. It means not inserting yourself into someone's culture. It means not using one's own group as the standard by which to assess appropriate behavior in others. Differences should not be seen as deviant. This means being aware of your own racist, sexist, or other detrimental attitudes, beliefs, and feelings, and communicating in easy-to-understand language that is linguistically and culturally appropriate when working with diverse students and families. It's also important to realize that individuals within the same cultural group can still differ in terms of intracultural differences. For example, the lived experiences and worldviews could be different for a person of Mexican descent compared to someone who is Puerto Rican. Both could identify as Hispanic or Latino, but speak different languages and have very different customs, attitudes, or beliefs. So when working with different cultures, it's not possible to anticipate every cultural belief or tradition you could encounter. And this is why it's important to equip yourself with the skills to understand the Hispanic students and families that you serve and educate. Be certain that you are 1, respecting their cultural practices, attitudes, and beliefs, 2, showing consideration of their feelings by checking your own potentially biased points of view, 3, being polite, patient, and empathetic, 4, listening attentively when communicating, and 5, respecting their right to privacy about their culture. Basically, this boils down to treating others how you want to be treated. Refugee, immigrant, and migrant are terms that are often used interchangeably. However, it is important to note the difference because often this plays a hand in what kind of services these individuals or families need and what kind of trauma they may have encountered. According to the Pew Research Center in 2018, these are the 20 metropolitan areas with the largest number of immigrants. Here in Georgia, Atlanta had roughly 1 million immigrants residing in the state in 2018. In 2020, there were 22.1 million non-citizens in the United States, accounting for roughly 7% of the total U.S. population. Many individuals live in mixed immigration status families that may include lawfully present immigrants, undocumented immigrants, and/or other citizens. 1 in 4 children has an immigrant parent, and the majority of these children are citizens. So here's another knowledge check. True or false? Refugee, immigrant, and migrant can be used interchangeably. In other words, they mean the same thing. This answer is false. There's been confusion and debate over the use of these terms to describe the plight of those who leave their country of origin. But let's take a closer look at the distinct differences between a refugee, immigrant, and migrant. So what is the definition of a refugee, immigrant, and migrant, you might be wondering? Well, a refugee is someone who has been forced to flee his or her country of origin because of war, violence, or persecution, often without warning. They are unable to return home unless and until conditions in their native lands are safe for them again. These individuals are typically seeking or in need of international protection from dangers in their home country. For example, many of those crossing the U.S. border from Central American countries such as El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras are in fact asylum seekers, not migrants. They have a well-founded fear of persecution if they were to return home. Immigrant and migrant both include groups of people who have left their native lands. However, an immigrant is someone who decides to leave his or her homeland and move to a foreign country with the intention of settling there, whereas a migrant is someone who is moving from place to place, either within his or her country or across borders, usually for economic reasons such as seasonal work. Similar to immigrants, a migrant was not forced to leave his native country because of persecution or violence, but rather came seeking better opportunities. This is very common in Georgia due to the number of farms needing seasonal workers. So it's not uncommon to hear the term illegal immigrant, which is not the preferred word, or undocumented in the media to also describe someone who entered or stayed in the country without proper documentation. Deciding to leave one's homeland and embark upon the arduous journey of migrating to another country is not an easy decision to make. The journey often involves traumatic experiences that can occur before, during, and after arriving in the U.S. The migration journey is often extremely difficult, riddled with insurmountable challenges, and can be life-threatening. But for many families, it's their only option for survival. It's important to consider the reasons why someone migrated, as it may not have been a choice, but rather a necessity. For instance, an estimated 29% of foreign-born teenagers experience some form of trauma prior to migrating to the United States.
Cada uno de nosotros nos vamos de nuestros países para vivir una mejor vida que en la de nuestros países.
As you can imagine, there are many factors that influence the decision to migrate. Economic opportunities are often the main reason. The native country of many migratory Hispanic families had too few jobs and limited career growth opportunities. Poverty often results in a lack of basic necessities for life and survival. Sometimes there are barriers to accessing clean water or a nutritious meal. Children in U.S. schools have ready access to running water and the possibility of a free meal while receiving their education. This is often not the case for children whose families flee from their country of origin. Further, another impetus for immigrating to the U.S. is to obtain better educational opportunities for one's children to attend a good K-12 school, college, and university that can open doors for employment opportunities. Migrating to be with family is another common reason for embarking on the arduous migration journey. Families could be separated in their home countries way before they even start the migration journey. This separation from relatives and other loved ones can leave families and children left behind vulnerable to abuse and exploitation. They can also face food and shelter insecurity. In recent years, the U.S. has received high numbers of migratory unaccompanied minors. As people face economic hardship, they also face social and political issues in their home countries that force them to seek a better life. Many Latin American countries have experienced economic instability, environmental catastrophes, and political turmoil that lead to significant displacement of migrants and refugees to bordering countries such as the United States. Several Latin American countries are experiencing civil wars that are taking innocent lives and disrupting the economies there. Moreover, violence has taken over in some of these countries. Therefore, many families immigrate to the U.S. to escape from high rates of crime and violence typically associated with gangs and drug trafficking. At a young age, teens in some countries are surrounded by violence and drugs, and the need for money forces them to get involved with cartel-related activities. Gang violence has escalated with the extension of notoriously dangerous cartels such as MS-13, which is an El Salvador-based gang that has extended to other countries, and Los Zetas, which is a Mexican-based gang. These cartels' power extends from Central America to the border towns of the U.S. Cartels ruthlessly extort, exploit, traffic, assault, and kill individuals who cross their path. For example, El Salvador has the third highest rate of feminicide in Latin American countries. MS-13 has been known to target young girls for sexual exploitation and young boys to make them join their merciless armies. Refusing either often results in instant death for the children and their family members. Any or all of these stressors could lead families to make the difficult decision to immigrate to the United States. Although many times people move away from their home country so their family can have better education, better health, and better lives overall, traumatic events also tend to occur during the migration process, often because many families lack sufficient resources to prepare them for the journey. For example, it can be difficult to know how long the journey will take, which can last weeks to months in some cases. Many challenging obstacles exist, such as dangerous border patrolling, including ICE, a lack of food and water, homelessness, and environmental dangers. During migration, children or other loved ones can experience emotional, physical, and/or sexual abuse. Further, once at the border, many children have been separated from their family members, and some remain separated to this day.
No llores.
Terrified children cry for their parents, reportedly after being separated by Border Patrol agents. The audio was released to ProPublica and gives insight into the distress migrant children are in after they're detained.
Fortunately, many families have actually been reunified. However, the psychological damage caused by the grueling separation period has been done and would ideally be addressed through mental health and other support services offered in the community or schools. Here are some photos of rare unifications after parents and children had been separated at the border. Migratory families who do make it to the United States still face many challenges and traumatic stressors once they are here. Among them are extreme poverty, housing insecurities, and racism. Oftentimes, immigrants do not know where they will be living once they arrive to the United States, and due to limited resources, they end up residing in overcrowded housing, including overpopulated basements, small apartments, and dwellings with multiple families. Many immigrants are separated from or lose contact with their loved ones and do not have support from anyone once they get to the U.S. So it's also difficult for them to form relationships with others because they don't know who they can trust. This can lead to withdrawal and feelings of isolation, anxiety, and depression. Language barriers, being undocumented, a lack of bilingual staff and interpreters in schools and organizations, and discrimination all play critical roles in their limited access to job and educational opportunities, as well as to health care and social support services that they may need. Roughly 57% of Latinos have experienced a language or cultural barrier in the healthcare system, and that can then lead to serious apprehensions about trying to access medical care that they may need. It is important for migratory parents to be able to understand how they can receive support for themselves and for their children. Subsequently, for all of these reasons and a host of others, many migratory families and their children live in an ongoing state of fear and psychological distress.
Yo creo que familias latinos viven con más estrés y más miedo de lo normal porque vivimos en un país lejos de nuestros orígenes, lejos de nuestras raíces y lejos de nuestra familia. En mi caso, yo no tengo familia aquí excepto mi esposo y mis hijos, y no entendemos el lenguaje, y no entendemos las reglas. Todo es nuevo y todo es diferente. Nosotros pedimos ayuda o pedimos información, pero no lo recibimos. En mi caso, era difícil porque no sabía con quién hablar, y no sabía qué hacer con mi primera hija que tenía una discapacidad.
So, after hearing about and seeing images related to the migration journey and the traumatic experiences suffered by children and families, this is probably a good time to take a short break and do something to tend to your own self-care. Next, we'll be discussing childhood traumatic stress and adverse childhood experiences known as ACEs. We'll also be going over some of the ACEs and related mental health challenges that Hispanic children, especially those who are migratory or recently immigrated here, that they may be dealing with. Children are shaped by their earliest experiences and relationships. So creating safe, stable, nurturing relationships and environments in the home and at school are needed to really support their early brain development and promote lifelong learning and success. Conversely, frequent exposure to traumatic events and prolonged levels of toxic stress can dramatically change how the brain develops and affects such things as decision-making, learning, and their response to stress. So let's do another knowledge check. This time, take a minute to consider the 3 statements. Are they true or false? 1 out of every 4 children attending school has been exposed to a traumatic event that can affect learning and/or behavior. Trauma does not have an impact on school performance. You cannot help a child who has been traumatized. So here are the answers to the knowledge check and the facts about the impact of trauma on children. 1 out of every 4 children attending school has been exposed to a traumatic event that can affect their learning and/or behavior. Trauma can impact a child's school performance in the form of lower GPAs, more absences, and an increased likelihood of dropping out. Trauma can impair a child's ability to learn, and how much can depend on whether they experience an isolated traumatic event or multiple or ongoing traumas. Traumatized children may experience physical or emotional distress, which can be exhibited as signs like poor control of emotions or symptoms such as headaches or stomach aches. You can help a child who has been traumatized, such as by following your school's reporting procedures if you suspect abuse, or working with the child's caregiver to address the problems you see. This graph illustrates some of the typical trauma reactions among children of different ages. Trauma can happen when a child experiences an intense event that threatens, interferes with, or causes harm to his or her emotional, mental, and/or physical well-being, such as is the case with a natural disaster, war, abuse, violence, injury, and even poverty. Children who suffer from traumatic stress have been exposed to 1 or more traumas over the course of their lives and subsequently develop reactions that persist and affect their daily lives even after the traumatic event has ended. Traumatic reactions can include different responses such as anxiety, depression, behavior changes, problems with attention, and academic difficulties, among others. Traumatic stress can change how a child views the world and their futures and can lead to future employment problems. It can also take a tremendous toll on the entire family. Whether or not a child who experiences a traumatic event will actually develop symptoms of childhood traumatic stress depends on a variety of factors. These include the child's history of previous trauma exposure, their mental and emotional strengths and weaknesses, and the type of the support that they have at home, in the school, and in their community. Understanding childhood traumatic stress and adverse childhood experiences is important for several reasons. First, what happens in a child's childhood can affect what happens to them and how they behave in adulthood. For instance, adverse childhood experiences can lead to subsequent or repeated trauma in adolescence and adulthood. Second, experiencing traumatic stress in childhood can interfere with his or her daily life and ability to function and interacting with others, including their ability to concentrate, learn, and perform in school. It can also affect their behavior. Lastly, in order to provide effective educational and other services to migratory and immigrant Hispanic children, it is important for you to be able to practice cultural humility and to understand and empathize with the child and their family's background, including their unique and possibly trauma-filled lived experiences, both past and present. Traumatic experiences that occur in childhood from birth to age 17 are known as the adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, and cause extended or prolonged levels of stress known as toxic stress. ACEs and associated social determinants of health, such as living in under-resourced or racially segregated neighborhoods, frequently moving, and experiencing food insecurity, can cause this toxic stress. ACEs are common across all populations. The National Child Traumatic Stress Network reports that 1 in every 4 children attending school has been exposed to a traumatic event that can affect their learning and/or behavior. However, some populations, including women, racial ethnic minorities, and immigrants and refugees, are more vulnerable to experiencing ACEs because of the social and economic conditions in which they live, learn, work, and play. They disproportionately face more exposure to toxic stress from historical and ongoing traumas due to systemic racism, discrimination, or the impacts of multi-generational poverty resulting from limited educational and economic opportunities. These populations are at greatest risk of having experienced 4 or more ACEs in their lifetime. ACEs are linked to numerous chronic diseases and leading cause of death, such as heart disease, cancer, and suicide, just to name a few, as well as mental illness and substance abuse in adulthood. ACEs can also negatively impact education, job opportunities, and earning potential. ACEs contribute to increased risks of injury, sexually transmitted infections, maternal and child health problems, including teen pregnancy, and involvement in sex trafficking. Study findings show that as the number of ACEs increases, so does the risk of these negative outcomes. So let's do another knowledge check. What proportion of Hispanic children have suffered at least one adverse childhood experience or ACE? 34%, 57%, 78%, or 95%? The correct answer is 78%, according to a recent study conducted by Salud. Poverty, neglect, abuse, and household dysfunction, such as divorce, domestic violence, and substance abuse, are among the commonly reported adverse childhood experiences. Some of the unique traumas and toxic stressors that immigrant and migratory Hispanic children typically face include detainment or deportation of a parent or loved one, witnessing violence perpetrated against a parent or loved one, or experiencing violent victimization firsthand, neglect due to parents having to work multiple jobs to make ends meet, discrimination and racism even by their own people, such as being treated poorly by those Hispanic individuals who are documented or naturalized citizens, economic hardship and living in poverty, demoralizing legal proceedings such as an ICE court case, parents who are dealing with insurmountable stress, anxiety, and depression resulting from being undocumented, not being able to speak English, having limited education, and low-paying or unstable jobs. There are several core stressors that migratory and immigrant Hispanic children face. These include traumatic experiences from or since the migration journey, acculturation, which is the process of resulting changes that occur when 2 or more cultures interact, isolation and loneliness resulting from being separated from their loved ones, and resettlement and moving to another place to live. As mentioned earlier in this training, there are many challenges that families face during and following immigration to the U.S. Some children move away from their home country at an older age, and so they become used to their original culture and way of living. Moving to the United States can lead to the child facing a difficult time fitting in and or adjusting to the new cultures and new people that they will encounter. Children can also face bullying due to language barriers, being viewed negatively because they are quote-unquote different, and because of racism. Due to these profound concerns, it is not uncommon for immigrant and migratory Hispanic children to avoid engaging in extracurricular and recreational activities at school and in the community. All of this can lead to isolation, which in turn can cause several emotional and mental distress, including anxiety and depression. Many students and families that you teach or serve are living in fear primarily because of their legal status. For example, many children live in fear of coming home from school to discover that their parents have been detained or deported because they are undocumented immigrants. Children experience toxic stress when they are suddenly separated from their parents, which can obviously negatively impact brain development. For parents, they too are often afraid of being detained or deported, but they also have fears related to meeting their family's basic needs for survival, such as safe housing and being able to find work and keep a job that covers all the household bills, food, etc. Educators surveyed in 2017 and 2018 by the American Immigration Council reported several concerns related to immigration enforcement in the community, including student absences, decline in academic performance, and less involvement from parents. 84% of the educators said students from immigrant families experience concerns about enforcement while at school. Almost every survey respondent could recount ways in which students in their schools or classrooms felt nearly overwhelmed by fear and worry. Among the concerns that they voiced most frequently were students' fears of parents being taken away, especially while they were at school, fear of never seeing their parents again, and fear of parents losing their jobs. Also, Hispanic children and immigrant parents are aware of the limitations their families face because of the immigration policies and share the fear of enforcement that their parents feel. Participants in the study described students and families being preoccupied with avoiding interactions with systems such as education, healthcare, and social services, and they were also suspicious of those in positions of power, including law enforcement and even medical providers. So if there's a situation at school involving police presence, it's important to be aware that you might need to explain what's going on so that all of your children know that they are in a safe place.
Más impacto que causa en los niños inmigrantes cuando llegan a este país es el miedo. El miedo porque es el trauma que pasan cuando vienen para acá. El separarse de amigos, de familia, de la escuela, el cambio de idioma, el temor porque aunque ellos a veces son muy pequeños, no tienen documentos, entonces el que los pueda parar la policía. Entonces, pienso que ese es uno de los mayores temores que sufren los niños y que por supuesto les causa algún trauma psicológico el estar pensando que si sus papás pueden ser detenidos, que no tienen miedo en la escuela porque no conocen el idioma, el que no se sienten escuchados, no se sienten apoyados porque no tienen la misma oportunidad. Ellos lo sienten, que simplemente por no tener el mismo idioma. A muchas veces, y hemos visto ahorita con la pandemia y el regreso a clases, los niños, hay más bullying entre los niños. Entonces, la comunidad latina, la comunidad migrante, sufre más. ¿Por qué? Porque pues hay más bullying para los niños, ¿verdad? Que si no están aprendiendo bien el inglés, porque en estos meses que estuvieron en casa no practicaban tanto el inglés como en la escuela. Entonces, el llegar a la escuela de nuevo y que los compañeritos no los escuchen hablar bien el inglés también les causa temor, les causa bullying, y todos estos factores es muy preocupante para que los niños se puedan tener un desarrollo mejor.
Although most young Hispanics lead healthy, productive lives, some struggle with personal and societal traumas that leave them susceptible to psychological problems. Hispanic youth tend to be more vulnerable to mental health issues due to a combination of previous and ongoing traumatic experiences, cumulative toxic stress, and less access to needed support services. Studies have shown that Hispanic youth have the highest rates of depressive and suicidal symptoms of any ethnic group in the United States. Rates of post-traumatic stress disorder, substance abuse, and the risk for anxiety and behavioral problems are also elevated among these youth. Unfortunately, young Hispanics also experience multiple barriers to accessing adequate prevention and treatment services, thereby exacerbating mental health care disparities. Reasons for inadequate access include fear, discrimination, the cost of services, lack of health insurance, the stigma around mental health issues, and in many places a shortage of accessible, culturally appropriate mental and behavioral health programs and providers that can effectively screen, diagnose, and treat Hispanics. In addition to normal developmental life stressors, Hispanic youth also face minority status and acculturation-related stressors such as discrimination, cultural language barriers, and immigration challenges. Immigrants are often subjected to discrimination by the very organizations that are charged with protecting and caring for them, such as schools, police, legal, and social service personnel. They can even experience discrimination from other Hispanics, such as those who are U.S. born or documented. Discrimination, which is a critical life event and significant source of stress for many Hispanic adolescents, is associated with a wide range of harmful outcomes, including poorer physical health, depressive symptoms, psychological distress, and difficulty adjusting to a new country and a new culture. Further, Hispanic youth who experience multiple traumas, such as being treated poorly or discriminated against, being separated from a loved one, or facing household financial insecurities, may become overwhelmed and unable to cope with these stressors effectively due to a subsequent depletion of their cognitive and emotional resources. Further, those who recently immigrated to the U.S. have had few opportunities to develop a strong supportive network in their new communities, which significantly increases the likelihood of experiencing depressive symptoms. Subsequently, chronic feelings of sadness, social withdrawal, and social isolation can contribute to a higher level of anxiety, stress, and depression. Moreover, undiagnosed, misdiagnosed, or untreated mental health issues can result in an array of broader negative outcomes for Hispanic youth. This, in turn, can sometimes translate into negative interactions at school and with authorities, increased disconnection from family and society, and for some, eventual exposure to the criminal justice system. Fortunately, there are several individual, family, and community level factors that can help protect or prevent youth from experiencing mental health and even academic challenges. In order to nurture a culture of mental health within the Hispanic community, it's important to increase your understanding of the specific needs of the Hispanic youth, as well as the protective factors that can contribute to mental and emotional well-being. Protective factors most relevant to immigrant and migratory Hispanic youth include, at the individual and family level, families where caregivers can meet the basic needs of food, shelter, and health services for their children, children who have caring adults outside the family who serve as mentors and role models, such as you in the schools, children who have positive friendships and peer networks, children who do well in school, families where caregivers have steady employment, families with strong social support networks and positive relationships with the people around them, families where caregivers engage in parental monitoring, supervision, and consistent enforcement of the rules of the household, and families that encourage the importance of school for children. Some of the community protective factors are communities where residents feel connected to each other and are involved in community activities, where families have access to medical care and mental health services, communities with access to affordable, safe, and stable housing, communities where families have access to economic and financial help, where families have access to nurturing and safe child care, communities where families have access to safe, engaging after-school programs and activities, and communities where adults have work opportunities with family-friendly policies. Next, we'll be going over some of the adverse childhood experiences and related mental health challenges that Hispanic children, especially those who are migratory or recently migrated here, may be dealing with. Common needs across all children are safety, understanding, and support. As noted previously, migratory and immigrant Hispanic children may feel unsafe due to racially motivated incidents or threats of violence and bullying. They may be anxious about being separated from their parents, their home life, or their parents losing their job. Dealing with so many life stressors can trigger acting out behaviors. Conduct problems such as aggressiveness and oppositional behavior, which are often connected to environmental risk factors, are prevalent among at-risk Hispanic youth. Although these are often linked to or mask other mental health issues such as depression and low self-esteem. If a child is experiencing high levels of stress or chronic stress, they may have outbursts to deal with their overwhelming feelings. So when children act out, it may be because they need or want attention or because they feel they're not in control of a situation and they don't know how to vent their frustrations in a healthy or productive way. A child's behavior is a form of communication, and at times they may not know how to regulate their own feelings and emotions. Therefore, it's important to recognize and acknowledge what the child is feeling and to be understanding, empathetic, and comforting. Communication is crucial to building a relationship with your student. It's also important to show them that they have a voice and that you are there to listen to them. Hispanic children often face more obstacles in school as a result of the risk factors and traumatic experiences highlighted throughout this training module. The worry and uncertainty that many Hispanic children have grown up with has become more pronounced now than ever. So there are a few strategies that you can employ to help them cope and prevent acting out behaviors. For example, you should build a foundation with the child so that he or she feels comfortable coming to you. Encourage them to talk about their emotions and share their thoughts while giving them your full attention. Try your best to put yourself in their shoes and see things from their perspective. Validate their emotions and try to resist the urge to immediately offer solutions or advice if you're unsure of what to say. Once you truly listen, you can ask your student how you can help or offer various self-care or self-help methods such as journaling or taking a moment of meditation. Also, considering a child's emotional reaction to an academic challenge may be instructive for school teachers and counselors seeking to promote optimal educational outcomes for children at risk of failure or bad behavior. Putting these strategies into practice can help to positively impact their academic performance and even their behavior in school and to reduce some of their psychological distress. Among all ethnic racial groups, adolescence is characterized by significant physical, mental, and interpersonal maturation and change. Because traumatic experiences and mental health challenges can have a direct impact on a student's academic performance and behavior in school, providing informed care, support, and services can be especially important. Healing, wellness, and positive self-esteem can be promoted by using a strategic approach that recognizes the traumatic events they may have experienced and the effects of that trauma. So it's essential that school personnel are aware of the prevalence and impact of trauma in this unique population. Staff should also keep in mind that Hispanic families, especially those that are undocumented and do not speak English, can face numerous barriers to accessing adequate prevention and treatment services due to cost of services. They may lack health insurance, and there may be a shortage of accessible, culturally appropriate mental and behavioral health programs and providers. So given all of this, school teachers, counselors, and other student support staff need to apply what's called a trauma lens when offering assistance. This means viewing a child's difficulties in behavior, learning, and relationships as a natural reaction to the events, experiences, and effects of trauma that they may have encountered, which obviously warrants your understanding, sensitivity, and empathy. In practice, a trauma-informed approach emphasizes safety, trust, collaboration, choice, and healing, as well as the importance of cultural, historical, and gendered aspects of trauma. You can increase a young person's chances of resilience to adverse child experiences by applying the 4 R's of the trauma-informed approach. Realize the widespread impact of childhood trauma, especially among immigrant and migratory Hispanic youth, and offer pathways to their recovery. Recognize signs and symptoms of trauma among all stakeholders involved, including the child, his or her family, school personnel, and others involved in the system. Respond appropriately through trauma-informed policies, procedures, and practices, and protect children from further adversity by actively resisting re-traumatizing them with your current words and actions. All right, time for another knowledge check. Which of the following help increase the likelihood of positive student outcomes? A, applying a trauma lens. B, parents, teachers, counselors, etc., working together to meet a child's educational, behavioral, and emotional needs. C, providing culturally appropriate services and resources. D would be A and B. E would be A and C. Or F, all of the above. The answer is, of course, all of the above. Evaluations of trauma-informed care indicate that when parents, teachers, counselors, social workers, student support staff all share a common language and common view of trauma, they are better able to work together to meet the child's unique and complex needs for academic success, as well as for their healthy growth and development. It's important to note that while Hispanic children and families often face a range of traumatic stressors, the majority have historically been remarkably resilient nevertheless as a result of strong family ties, community support, and a cultural disposition of perseverance and optimism. This has helped many immigrant and migratory students and families thrive. But guess what? There's even more good news. You can help prevent them from suffering more traumatic stresses and re-traumatization through effective programming and trauma-informed approaches offered in your schools and broader communities. For instance, adverse childhood experiences and traumatic stresses can be prevented using several proven effective strategies. For example, number 1, strengthen household financial security and supports for families, such as by making free classes on English learning and technology and computers available to parents to increase their employability. Number 2, change the social norms to support parents in positive parenting, such as educating school personnel on the unique challenges and concerns often faced by immigrant and migratory Hispanic children and families. 3, you can intervene to lessen the immediate and long-term harms caused by trauma, such as through exercising empathy, having bilingual staff and interpreters at the schools, and offering school programs and services that can help to reduce the impact of ACEs on immigrant and migratory children and families. 4, provide access to culturally and linguistically appropriate services during all phases of education and service provision, including outreach and assessment, and integrating cultural beliefs, values, and practices into those services. 5, communicate in a way that is culturally appropriate and respectful to increase student and family engagement. 6, pay close attention to the signs of acculturative stress, which is stress related to cultural integration and assimilation, particularly as they relate to the youth dynamics with parents and families. Family-centered approaches should be strengthened in both the assessment and therapeutic processes for supporting youth. And lastly, 7, involve mental health practitioners as needed in a comprehensive conceptual framework that provides in-depth, non-stereotyping, assets, and healing-based approaches toward educating, supporting, and serving Hispanic children and their families. Basically, the take-home message here is that school personnel and school-based programs can serve as critically important pieces of the trauma-informed service provision puzzle. Given the prevalence of ACEs among Hispanic youth, especially those who recently immigrated to the United States, and because children who have been through trauma take their experiences with them to school and everywhere they go, you should be applying a trauma lens whenever you work with your students. Doing so will help you better meet their academic and behavioral needs. Schools can be the sole source of education, information, support, and even sustenance for many immigrant and migratory families. Therefore, based on the feedback that we obtained in our focus groups with Hispanic families in Hall, Fulton, and Gwinnett counties, there are certain services and resources that should be offered in your schools to help the children and their families succeed. As noted throughout this training, language is a significant barrier to accessing and utilizing educational and other services. When working with Hispanic families, it's important to be able to communicate with them in the language they feel most comfortable and can best express themselves. Services and support should be delivered in their preferred language and/or mode of delivery. Therefore, it is essential for schools to have bilingual personnel, paraprofessionals, or professional interpreters, including school-based mental health providers, readily available on site to assist monolingual and limited English-speaking students and their caregivers. Bilingual school personnel and therapists who are attuned to the meaning and affect nuances of language can follow the students and the family's lead regarding the language used that is most ideal to them. They also need to be familiar with Hispanic cultural values and how to engage these values in trauma-informed service provision. It's a mistake to assume that a bilingual staff member or interpreter is not needed if the child or their parent speaks English. Even students who speak English fluently may prefer using Spanish to describe their emotions or traumatic experiences. Further, because there are Hispanic parents, especially recent immigrants, who may not be proficient in English, communications and written materials should be translated into Spanish and provided in alternate formats based on the needs and preferences of your students and their families. So, for example, a recent immigrant with job instability and subsequent financial struggles may not have access to a computer, so they may never access information in English that is shared with the school website or via email.
Sí, pues sí, el apoyo que se necesita más es que el primero es que hayan más traductores en las escuelas. Hay muchas escuelas en donde no hay nadie del personal que hable español. Entonces, se necesita también capacitar a los intérpretes porque lamentablemente muchos intérpretes no traducen bien. A mí me ha tocado tener que parar al intérprete y decir, ¿sabes qué? Mejor no me traduzcas o fíjate bien, yo entiendo que es difícil tener que traducir y estar al mismo paso que los maestros y que nosotros, pero hay veces que en verdad los traductores no traducen casi nada lo que decimos. Entonces, sí necesitamos este apoyo que capaciten a los traductores, que nos pongan más traductores y también me gustaría que hubiera programas en donde den clases en las escuelas a los padres de inglés. Algunos condados, algunos distritos escolares, sí, antes de pandemia habían clases de inglés para los padres. Por pandemia se detuvo, pero me gustaría que hicieran esto más común, que fuera algo más en, en la mayoría de los distritos escolares y más en donde hay más comunidad latina o comunidad inmigrante, porque es una forma de apoyarnos a nosotros a superarnos para poder aprender inglés. Necesitamos que también nos tengan más paciencia, que nos involucren, que los avisos, muchas veces las notas que nos mandan son en inglés, que va a haber una reunión o que van a haber alguna actividad en la escuela y la mayoría de las veces es en inglés. Entonces sí nos gustaría también que nos mandaran todos esos documentos en español para nosotros también poder participar más en las escuelas, para estar al pendiente con nuestros hijos. Que, que los maestros tengan un poquito más de consideración con nuestros hijos, un poquito más de empatía, más de paciencia.
Because a child's mental wellness and subsequent academic performance in school conduct is so closely tied to the wellness and stability of his or her family and home life, supports for parents are pertinent as well. Offering free or low-cost evening or weekend classes at the school could help reduce some of the barriers that they face. So, for example, they need GED classes and classes that teach them to speak English and how to operate computers and other technology. They also want to learn about navigating the education system so they can be more engaged at their children's schools, help their children with their homework when needed, and have information to help their children get scholarships for college. It's important to remember that sometimes schools are the only place where immigrant and migratory Hispanic parents can get help and support. Additionally, these parents who participated in our focus group would love to have mental health education and trauma training. This would be not only for themselves, but also for teachers, counselors, and administrators so that they know the challenges that their children often face and what to look for in their children since they spend so much time of their day with school personnel. In the words of one of our focus group participants, teachers and others in the community need to understand our needs and know what our children endure if they are in a moment of crisis so they can be able to help. That's what we want and what we think is the most important thing, that they know us, that they know our children, and that they accept our children and include them. Similar to schools, the community should also reflect cultural competence and offer culturally appropriate services to best support immigrant and migratory Hispanic children and families. A huge challenge for this population is the significant lack of resources and services available in Spanish. So providing resources in a safe location, such as a community center or a church, can really help families feel safer receiving services and resources for mental health and other social support services. More culturally appropriate information about available services is needed, including written materials in Spanish and effective outreach and marketing to the Hispanic population. Also, services need to be more accessible by being located near public transportation and providing teleeducation and telehealth, especially for those living in rural areas, in order to address their transportation barriers. As stated earlier, the strategies used by school staff should be adapted to fit the unique needs of Hispanic students affected by adverse childhood experiences, those who are experiencing toxic stress or have mental health challenges, so that their issues can be addressed in a culturally appropriate and effective way. So this is when practicing what you've learned in this training becomes essential. Specifically, you need to apply a trauma-informed lens when dealing with your students who may be struggling academically or behaviorally. Additionally, you should exercise cultural sensitivity, competence, and humility in every situation. Showing empathy, kindness, and patience can go a long way in preventing a difficult situation from getting worse, as can being aware of your own biases that may be influencing your actions. Moreover, it's important to remember that while there are some common values among different Hispanic groups, such as family, respect, and communal support, there are also significant differences in their cultural and lived experiences and practices. Even among people from the same country, there are important differences related to their respective region of origin, experiences related to the migration journey, acculturation to mainstream American culture, and socioeconomic factors. Subsequently, individualizing education and service provision plans is important because there's no one-size-fits-all plan that will work for all immigrant and migratory Hispanic children or their families. Also, why it may be confusing to know which term is most respectful, Hispanic, Latino, or Latinx, it's best practice to use the terminology that the individual actually uses to self-identify. So if a student or parent identifies as Latino or Hispanic, for example, you should mirror that terminology when working with them. Migratory and immigrant children continue to face traumatic experiences and cultural barriers while living in the United States. Given that the Hispanic youth population currently accounts for 1/4 of all youth under the age of 18, a portion that will become 1/3 within the next 20 years, it is in our nation's best interest to protect these youth against damaging risk factors and foster healthy, resilient children and families by using trauma-informed approaches and providing culturally appropriate services.